You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Christina Paterson and the barrister Andrew Eborn. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Hostage deal on course after Hamas delay prompts crisis is the headline on the front of The Observer. The Sunday Mirror leads with one father's relief following his daughter's release by Hamas. The headline says his darling girl is broken, but in one piece. Meanwhile, the headline on the front of the Sunday Times reads, they thought they were about to be executed, then freedom. The front of the Sunday Express says Tory MPs have warned that they face electoral catastrophe if they fail to stop migrant boats by polling day. The charity regulator has vowed to crack down on bodies that host anti-Semitic extremists. That's on the front of the Telegraph. The Sun on Sunday claims the King branded Prince Harry that fool, quoting a new book leaked to the newspaper. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined once again tonight by Christina Paterson and Andrew Eborn. Welcome back to both of you. Let's start with the Times front page and that story beginning to get accounts from hostages that have been released, and the very chilling account from one hostage quoted in the paper, the fact that they thought they were about to be executed and then realised they were free.
Absolutely horrific. This is Christina Lamb is just a completely fantastic reporter, and she's there in Tel Aviv, and it sounds as if she's got the first direct story from one of the hostages who's been released here. And yes, talking about the absolute terror and how they apparently thought they were going to be executed when they were led out of the tunnels. And if anyone doubts, by the way, that there are networks of tunnels underneath all the, that Hamas don't have networks of tunnels, then this is obviously yet more evidence that they do, and that's where the hostages have been held. And the reason they knew something was up was because there was silence for the first time instead of the bombing that had been pretty relentless since the war had started. And interestingly, there's, I think one of the relatives here talks about how, I can't remember who it was, but when she was taken onto a bus by Hamas, she slapped away the hand of the Hamas terrorist, which is a very different story to one of the first hostages who was released, who shook the hand of her Hamas terrorist and said, how lovely they had been, essentially. Well, that's rather debatable in the circumstances, or rather not very debatable. But these people have been through absolute terror, and the children everyone will be deeply traumatised, but the children, obviously, the younger you are when this kind of trauma happens to you, tragically, the bigger effect it's likely to have on your developing brain. So we just have to hope, essentially, that people will get enormous, intensive support to help them deal with what they've been through. But many of them will be only now discovering that very close relatives have died or been severely injured in the terrible attack. And also they will be discovering the reality of what's been happening in Gaza, and the idea that you have been in any way connected with that horrific bloodshed must be an incredibly difficult thing to live with.
And we're getting a little bit of an insight, Andrew, into how the hostages were treated, because Adina Moshe, who was led along the tunnels, her nephew is quoted here as saying that they kept up the terror to the end.
Yeah, absolutely horrendous, as we all recognise. I mean, to not know what your own future could hold. And obviously, within the time they've been held captive, they don't know what else has been going on. So they're now coming out, and how you deal with that, some of the revelations will be that their own family members have been murdered, and they're coming out on that sort of basis as well. So it is horrendous. We're going to hear more and more of these stories, and the support that's needed behind the scenes to basically deal with this trauma which goes on forever. And I said beforehand that the difficulty with the media is that we turn around and we get anaesthetised in a way when you hear so much horrendous stuff until you start seeing the pictures of those concerned. And that's why it's that mixture of relief that some people have been released, but also the realisation that the horrendous murders and so on and so forth, and the suffering which has gone on and still goes on.
Indeed, and we turn to the quote of Thomas Hand. This is on the front of the Mirror. "My darling girl is broken, but in one piece." This is 9-year-old Emily Hand, who celebrated a birthday whilst in captivity, and we've heard a lot from her father, Thomas, about the despair that he was going through, and the fact that he really believed that she'd be wondering, where is my daddy? Why isn't my daddy here to save me? But pictured there, released having spent her 9th birthday in captivity. Christina?
Yes, I think the agonising relationship that all the relatives of the hostages have had with hope, I mean, I don't think any of us can begin to imagine, but, you know, reporters do sometimes say things like, "Do you still have hope?" What is someone meant to say? Because hope, as the Bible says, hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. And hope is both a kind of amazing thing and a terrible thing, because obviously many people did die. Some of the hostages have presumably died. We don't know. Some of them might have been killed in the bombing. We don't know. So it has been, I think, probably for anyone. I remember there was a heartbreaking account of a woman who talked about her son who was severely injured and then kidnapped. She doesn't know if he's alive. Just agony. And although, of course, there will be celebrations of a kind when people are reunited, you know, that the pain will be just enormous, and the trauma will be enormous. So thank goodness this young girl is back with her family, but I don't think any of us can think this is the end of it for her.
And you make the point about the range of emotions that they will have been through, and particularly in Thomas Hand's case, he was previously told that she had been killed.
Yes.
So coming to that point, and then to be told, actually, no, she's still captive.
It's a roller coaster of horrendous emotion. And whilst, I mean, the statistics, I say they're changing all the time, but the headline it says on the Mirror is that they freed 17 after agonising delay, but 200 are still held captive in Gaza. And it's just remembering how that might feel and so on and so forth, and the devastating effect it's going to have forever. You know, I think it's not something you ever get over, and the help that's needed behind the scenes. But also what the Qataris have done and what the Egyptians have done with the negotiations and so on and so forth, all of this will become apparent later on. They always say the first casualty in war is the truth, but undoubtedly there'll be more stories coming out over the next several days.
And Christina, what's your analysis of the hiccup as it's been described, that hour of delay when Hamas were suggesting that they were not getting the humanitarian aid that was part of the ceasefire deal, the IDF saying, you know, that they're playing games, essentially, we've kept up every part of the deal?
I think it's very hard to know, actually. I mean, what Hamas said was that not enough convoys had gone to the north where the help was most needed. I mean, this is basically he said, she said, so we just can't know the truth of it. I think it's, I mean, thank goodness there are mediators, because how on earth either how Israel can deal with Hamas at all in these circumstances, I think directly it would be very difficult. But obviously they have to focus on getting the hostages released, and the families of the hostages think that Netanyahu has not done enough to get them released. And thank goodness we got to the point where some are, but as Andrew said, 200 still haven't been. Yeah. And this is going to be a kind of agonising drip, drip. And Israel has volunteered an extra day's ceasefire for, I think, every 10 further hostages that are released. So this kind of agonising drip, drip could go on for quite a while. And then Israel has said it will resume the war. 14,000 Palestinians have already been killed. Where does this end? Do they bomb every single building in the south of Gaza as well? It's very, very hard to see how this thing will end, and it's just a tragedy.
Let's move on to the Sunday Telegraph and the ramifications of the war back here. And this story is about a crackdown on charities that allegedly host extremists. What's the detail of this story?
Well, basically, I mean, there's been a massive rise in anti-Semitism and so on and so forth. So they're trying to look at regulators are vowing to stop premises being used as forums for anti-Semitism. And there have been a number of examples where hate speech has taken place in some of these establishments. So there needs, basically, we always need to shine more light and less heat on these sort of issues. But certainly this is a big issue. Anti-Semitism and, as I say, the poison that we've had on social media has spilled out onto the streets. And it is worrying. I live right in the heart of London, where you see these marches happening every weekend and so on and so forth. And everybody has an entitlement for people to march. It's a fundamental right. But the language that's used by some of the people on the marches, it's appalling, absolutely appalling. And so when premises are being used in the same sort of way to spill out that poison, then absolutely there must be a crackdown on that as well.
Yes, and Christina, they're mentioning hateful sermons being preached at mosques that are then actually linked to charities.
Yeah, I think to be charitable about it, I think that a lot of this is ignorance, actually. I think people get a lot of people. In fact, I read a very interesting piece this week in The Spectator by someone who's at a school saying that all her classmates get all their news from social media, from TikTok primarily, and it is all pro-Palestinian, and this sense that, that Israel is a kind of white, they're the white colonisers, and it's all about colonialism and occupation, and with no sense that Israel has a legal right to exist as a country, whatever it might be doing in terms of illegal occupation of the West Bank or the settlers. And so I do think there is this serious lack of nuance and education in this picture, which allows extremist preachers to become part of the picture and without people realising when lines have been crossed. I absolutely understand why anyone would be heartbroken about, I mean, how can you not be heartbroken about what's happening in Gaza? But to then instantly say that that Israel is this kind of evil colonising country, which does seem to me to be the view of quite a few of these. I wouldn't call it a pro-hate thing. I don't think for a moment those are pro-hate marches. I think most people just want there to be peace. But I do think there's a significant number of people who are pro-Palestinian who are crossing a line in terms of into hate speech, and I think that is worrying.
OK, but you're not suggesting that the majority of the people on the march are even supporting Hamas, just to be absolutely clear on that. On that note, we'll take a break. Christina and Andrew, thank you. Coming up, thousands of children suffer head injuries from rugby. We'll be discussing that next. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, journalist and author Christina Patterson and the barrister Andrew Eborn. Welcome back to both of you. Not that you've gone anywhere. Let's have a look at the Times front page. And I have to say, as a rugby mum, this story is quite worrying. Take us into it.
It is worrying, isn't it? But it's also a story which has been around for a long time. I had the pleasure of playing rugby on the same team as Johnny Wilkinson, albeit a few years apart. And it's always surprising, isn't it, when people sort of talk about these statistics. But they're saying that more than 4,000 under-18s were referred for medical intervention for suspected concussion on the playing field in the past 12 months. So that's a staggering statistic, 4,000. So the question is, what's going to happen about it? If you look at things like American sport, you've got American football, they're all padded out. At the moment in rugby, you have very little protection on that sort of basis.
Well, there's the head guard, but they don't all wear them.
They don't really get. They don't all wear it. And in my day, you just had a mouth guard, and that was about it. And it's the same with football. People are talking about heading and so on and so forth, and people are discovering things all of the time. The question with this sort of story is that it's half the story at the moment. You say, look, here's the problem. It's a story that's been around for a long time. What's going to be done about it? Because you either address it, either you're going to ban rugby. I think that's obviously not going to happen. Can we make it safer? Well, do we look to other shores, as I say, look at the States and how other sports are played, and the guards that you have in place? If you play something like ice hockey, for example, it's one big pad floating around on the ice. But it's incredibly violent and incredibly dangerous if you don't have that protection. And
that has to be the question, what is going to be done, doesn't it, Christina?
Who knew that a violent, brutish sport would cause damage to people's brains? It's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? I can't begin to imagine how this astonishing piece of news has broken. I mean, personally, anyone who knows me knows I am no sports lover, but I think I don't understand the attractions of rugby, but I really don't think it's a great idea to send children onto a field playing with, you know, in this way that exposes them to this much danger. And it is the same with football and heading. And obviously people, I think there are groups of rugby players who are now taking action, legal action. And I think it's, you know, you don't, as an 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, you're not really in a position to choose long-term decisions, that make long-term decisions about your health. You'll just go on a rugby field and you'll play it if your school or your village or your, you know, your local area.
But what's the answer, though? Do you ban the sport?
Well, I think you have to. I think you either have to insist on protection, protective clothing, or you do ban the sport, because I think the price is too high. I think if people really are going to suffer long-term damage to their health, and it looks as if they are, I think you do have to take it very seriously.
Well,
yes.
the younger ones, when they first start rugby, for example, they do what's called tag rugby,
no contact.
and you have there's no contact. So you can look at that sort of stuff. But you need a solution, as you say, and it's 300 people who started this class
and
action.
dementia, you know, people get dementia from football and rugby as well.
But they are looking at different ways of tackling, so to prevent concussion. So they are changing the rules and
all sports are getting safer, and you need to look at that sort of side.
Yes, I'm still worried. But anyway, let's move on. The Express, the Royals, crowning glory for the Royal sisters. This is the Crown returning and looking at the relationship between Princess Margaret and the late Queen.
It's a wonderful story, and there was a special screening for the Royal Television Society. I do the podcast for the Royal Television Society London, which is why I was wonderfully invited. And Imelda Staunton and Leslie Manville were there to launch what is the part 2 of the final series, which is going to air on December the 14th. And it's always a balance. This is basically about the relationship with Margaret and the Queen. And obviously a lot of it they won't know about because it's a very private relationship. Some of it's documented, some isn't. And the biggest thing is that balance between dramatisation and basically what are real events. And people get confused sometimes about what is a drama and what's a historically documentary, if you like. And I asked this question to Imelda, and she said, well, it's a redundant question. It is a drama. And obviously, if people are not in the room at the same sort of time, it's quite tricky. But they go, I mean, it's part of the relationship. It's glorious. It's an absolute glorious drama. But part of it, because it's been fictionalised, is made up. And you have to imagine what might have happened. And you're talking about teenagers when they first start on VE Day and so on and so forth, and what teenagers might have got up to. And you think, well, hang about, I don't really want to think of the Queen in that sort of situation. So it's a very difficult moment. It's also very touchingly dealing with the strokes that Margaret had.
Right.
And I have to say, it's both brave and brilliant. There are 273 characters in The Crown, and an absolute epic.
Just very quickly, because we're running out of time, in about 10 seconds, are you a fan of The Crown?
I loved the first 2 seasons, and then I'm afraid after the first episode of the next one, I thought this is completely ghastly. I thought the writing was terrible. It just didn't convince me, and I think that it has overstepped. Of course, it is a dramatisation, but I'm no longer
seconds.
a fan.
You got it in there. Christina and Andrew, thank you so much for taking us through the papers. Thank you.